Now, I think it goes without saying that The Acolyte hasn't exactly been the most warmly welcomed Star Wars project in history. Just look at those like to dislike ratios on the first trailer, and you'll see there are plenty of people out there who are not looking forward to this one. And almost to their credit, I would say, I hadn't really seen anyone with Lucasfilm or anyone from the show like Leslye Headland herself, who was the showrunner, of course, or any of the actors or anyone else like a Kathleen Kennedy maybe, take the bait, if you will, and go on the offensive here. Instead, most everything they've been saying in interviews and such is the standard promotional stuff. It's marketing, it's them talking about the show itself, what it's kind of about, what their roles are, and how excited they all are. And everything else, all the other stuff, again, all that pushback has been pretty much ignored. That is, until rather recently, where some of it has now been addressed in a New York Times article that spoke with both Kennedy and Headland. Though in all fairness, even the stuff I'm going to share today isn't the worst responses I have ever seen or heard. And do keep in mind, these were interviews, these were them being asked these questions and responding to them. It is not them necessarily even bringing it all up themselves. And so, kind of keeping that in mind, that these are responses to questions, I want to do something a little different with this video. Instead of just going into what they said and how I may interpret it or whatever, I'm going to do what rarely ever gets done in these interviews when these sorts of questions are asked. I'm going to present a series of follow-up questions to them that I would ask if I was the one doing the interview. And no, I'm not doing this as some sort of gotcha or something like that, because they're obviously never going to answer these questions of mine. Instead, I ask them because I am genuinely curious how they would actually answer them and how you think they would answer them. So often today, I feel like someone will say something in an interview just because it is the right thing to say or because it makes them sound good or look virtuous, but they don't ever have to explain what they actually mean or defend that view at all. In fact, oftentimes questioning their view or belief in any way will just be dismissed because, again, the initial statement or response is considered the correct one, and thus it'll sort of be implied it requires no further explanation, and to then question it, to want that further explanation, means that you, the one asking the question, must completely disagree with what they're saying and are an evil person who shouldn't be dignified with a response in the first place. That's how it all too often seems to work these days. And so let's now get to their responses, and the article didn't even say what the actual questions were. They just sort of implied the topic, which is, in this case, a negative response from some fans about the Acolyte, and how it seems to be, from their point of view, motivated by hate or anger at representation. And this is how Kennedy and Headland responded to this question. Again, we don't have the actual question, but basically what they said about the topic, and let us begin with what Kennedy had to say. My belief is that storytelling does need to be representative of all people. That's an easy decision for me, she then goes on to say. Operating within these giant franchises now, with social media and the level of expectation, it's terrifying. I think Leslye has struggled a little bit with it. I think a lot of women who step into Star Wars struggle with this a bit more. Because of the fan base being so male-dominated, they sometimes get attacked in ways that can be quite personal. Okay, so again, if I were conducting this interview, my follow-up questions would be, do you think fans have ever attacked George Lucas in a way that was quite personal, especially in relation to the prequels or here after the fact because of him selling to Disney? Or what about Rian Johnson or J.J. Abrams when it comes to the sequels? Do you think fans have ever personally attacked them in a way that went over the line? And if so, did them being men have anything to do with why they were attacked, or was it just all Star Wars related for them? And if it was all about Star Wars in those cases, why do you think it's all about Headland being a woman when she is attacked, or when any other woman who is in Star Wars is attacked? I mean, I don't recall much of a pushback at all when it was announced that Deborah Chow would be directing the Kenobi series. So what's the difference here? Or different with Bryce Dallas Howard seemingly praised by a lot of fans for her episodes of The Mandalorian. So again here, why is this happening to Headland in particular when we have examples of women who were not attacked? Do you think it may have something to do with, right or wrong, fair or not, her having been a personal assistant to Harvey Weinstein? Is that maybe why the Acolyte is being rejected by so many fans ahead of time? Does it perhaps go beyond simply that she's a woman and men are going to be harder on them in Star Wars? I would then, after getting her answers to the first questions, which would likely get some follow-up questions as well, But I would ask her, why does she think Star Wars has a male-dominated fan base in the first place? And do you see that as a problem that needs to be fixed? Should the fan base, for example, be a 50-50 split? And until it is, there is a imbalance in the Force. I would then, depending on her answer to that one, I would go on to say or ask if it is being more tailored towards a male audience. And yes, most of the characters in the films are men, and Lucas has even said before he made it originally for 12-year-old boys. If this approach makes it difficult then for women to get into it, which is basically something Kennedy has kind of claimed before, that a lot of women or girls don't watch Star Wars because there's not enough female characters for them to relate to. And so if that is the case, wouldn't the same problem arise the other way around? Wouldn't a show that features more female characters, or a movie, whatever it might be, wouldn't that be more difficult for men to get into if we apply the same logic or reasoning? And wouldn't they be, in a sense, justified to feel that way? I mean, if it's okay for a woman to say, I'm not able to get into Star Wars because it features too many men, wouldn't it be okay for a man to say the same thing? Wouldn't it be a double standard to not allow him to say the same thing? Shouldn't we try to understand men's frustration when there's not enough male characters to relate to, the same way we understand women's frustration with the same problem? And before going on, please do keep in mind here, or continue to keep in mind, these are questions I would ask. They are not necessarily indicative of what I believe. I simply want to know what her answers would be. So anyway, I'd then go on to bring up what she said at the start, or her first statement there, that my belief is that storytelling does need to be representative of all people. I would ask, how do you actually accomplish that? How do you represent everyone? How do you, say, put one person of a certain race or gender or sexuality in a film or in a show and claim that represents everybody who shares that characteristic? Does that not make this sort of argument or assumption that all people of a certain race, gender, sexuality are pretty much the same then? That we are not all unique individuals that happen to share some physical characteristics or traits or whatever it might be, that we share them with other people, but rather it's those characteristics that define who we are. And that instead of trying to create entertainment for everybody, wouldn't it make more sense to make it for anybody? Meaning the message should be we can see ourselves in other people, not that we have to see other people that look like us to have any sort of connection with them. And to be clear, this is not meant as an argument against diversity in films or entertainment. I have said before that if Star Wars can be full of aliens of all shapes, sizes, and colors, it can certainly be full of many different looking humans with many different backgrounds and beliefs. Only that you could almost say you're taking the wrong approach, I feel. And that it could even come off as sort of insulting to say that since this character is the same color as you, that they are you, that they represent you, when that might be, their skin color might be, virtually the only thing you have in common with that person on screen. Alright, and now let's move on to what Leslye Headland said, or actually texted. I think this was an interview that was conducted over the phone via text, but whatever, it still works. Let's go over what she responded. And so she texted, "As a fan myself, I know how frustrating some Star Wars storytelling in the past has been. I've felt it myself. I stand by my empathy for Star Wars fans, but I want to be clear, anyone who engages in bigotry, racism, or hate speech, I don't consider a fan." Okay, so the first thing I would pretty obviously ask here is, what part of Star Wars didn't you enjoy and why? And if she said she was disappointed in them for, say, Star Wars reasons, or because they just weren't very good, or anything along those lines really, I would go on to ask, will she then accept if people ultimately say the same things about her show, that they didn't feel like it was very Star Wars-like, or maybe it breaks the canon, or it just wasn't very good? I then go on to ask if she thinks that a dislike for something Star Wars and going out on social media and expressing it or saying as such, if that ever intentionally gets conflated with, by either other fans, the media, or even some at Lucasfilm, if that ever gets conflated with truly hateful things. Does she think the term hate speech ever gets used as a sort of deflection of genuine criticism? And if so, doesn't she think she should be careful about saying anyone who engages in these things is not a fan, given how subjective those condemnations can be at times? Finally, and only continuing to be in response to what she said, keeping in mind there's a lot of other things I would love to ask her about if actually given the chance to talk to her, mainly how she views the Jedi and the Force, but we're only talking about these particular comments. But anyway, I would finally ask her, and this is going to be a long one to finish off, But where does she think the line between being a fan disappointed and even upset about something Star Wars and saying as such on social media or making videos about it, where does that sort of end and being truly hateful or negative or toxic begin? Are some fans too quick to label others as haters or toxic? And yeah, vice versa sometimes too. Some fans are too quick to label others shills because they liked something. And along with this, wouldn't Disney and Lucasfilm want people to tell them why they don't like Star Wars these days so they can understand what they're doing wrong from that fan's point of view at least? Instead of them, that fan just quietly walking away and Disney and Lucasfilm never knowing why? And wouldn't you think the fans always being positive that it could send the wrong sort of message to them and be detrimental in the long run? That if we fans never ever complain about anything, they may get kind of lazy and take advantage of us loving everything Star Wars and start putting in less and less effort. And I mean, as someone who gets feedback all the time with every single video I make, honestly, and I do read a ton of my comments, and also as someone who has done and shared their own stories on this channel, I can say that though I love when people love and enjoy my work, and I do greatly appreciate them saying as much, I do like nice things said about what I've done. But in this very strange sort of way, I value the negative responses more because it allows me to perhaps see areas I could improve upon. Not to mention, if you're always being super positive about Star Wars, you're not being very honest, are you? There's virtually no way you love everything Star Wars has ever done or put out there unless you're not being critical of it at all. And if you are not being critical at all, then there's no value in that person's opinion of it. Why would I care about someone's review of The Acolyte or whatever Star Wars project it might be if they have never once said anything bad about Star Wars before and call anything or anyone not positive about it toxic? And no, it's not all that different from people who already say The Acolyte is the worst thing Star Wars ever made without having seen it, or going along with The Acolyte and how it is set in the High Republic period. I have personally heard so many people trash the time period, the High Republic, and call it awful. And when I ask what parts they've read, they tell me they haven't read any of it. It's just trash. They know it's trash, and they've heard other people say it's bad, and that's all they need to know. In other words here, to get to the question here, shouldn't we simply be encouraging people on both sides of the debate to be more honest and civil rather than just calling one side haters and the other side shills? We all have our opinions. Shouldn't that be embraced? But anyway, those would be my follow-up questions, and that's also going to be all I have for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and give me either your follow-up questions, what you would ask Kennedy or Headland if given the chance, or how do you think they would answer my questions? Whatever the case may be, leave those comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And so until next time, thanks for watching.